Okay, so I'm going to hold forth for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to go into breakout groups, and we'll explain to you how that's going to work. So instead of having Q&A, you're going to do Q&A with one another, and Diane and I will circulate. So what we said before was that we have some really important theological challenges. And if you look at the South African document, talks about church theology and state theology, and talks about how important it is to understand how the church has cooperated with and really helped the evil system. In fact, if you take another look at the word Kairos, sometimes we contrast it with Chronos. But I think the better way to contrast it, and we're starting to think more about this, and we're going to do some writing about it, is to think about contrasting Kairos and cosmos. So Kairos is when history breaks open and actually penetrates and deconstructs the existing system, the existing structure of oppression. Now, cosmos is another one of those Greek words that comes up again and again in the New Testament, but one of the more famous examples of that, and the most well-known, is Jesus before Pilate in John, where Jesus famously says to Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world." It's usually translated, "My kingdom is not of this world," right? The word that's used there is cosmos. Now, in classic liberation theology, and Walter Wink is the guy to read on this. Those of you who have not read Walter Wink and really want to get into it, he writes a lot, and it's worth it. Says you need to translate the word that's used and usually translated as kingdom as the order. The word is cosmos. Cosmos means the established order. So what Jesus is saying is, this order that we are living under, that you are working for, and so is Herod, by the way, so are the Pharisees, by the way, they're all part of this evil system. It's based on greed and oppression and the 1%, ripping off the 99%, all of that. My kingdom, my world is something else, and that's what I'm bringing. And I'll get back to that when I get sort of go through this narrative. So we have cosmos, which is structural evil. It's the machine. And that's what we're up against, which is why we should not underestimate what we are up against. This is not just about working for the liberation of one oppressed people who number like about 10 million in the whole world, right? I mean, there are bigger fights out there, you would think. This is about taking on the basic structure of the world as we know it today, because that's what our alliance with Israel is all about. So we should not be under any illusions about what we are taking on. Another reason to read Ali Abunima's book, The Battle for Justice in Palestine, is that where he says the Palestinians are winning. He has a wonderful chapter where he talks about South Africa and Northern Ireland. And he said, why is it that all of a sudden Ian Paisley is hugging Jerry Adams and saying, we're going to create a government together? Ian Paisley, who was basically sending people with arms out to kill a guy, and talking about how the entire survival of the Protestant race in Northern Ireland depends on getting rid of those Catholics. All of a sudden, he's hugging Jerry Adams. What's that about? And why is it that de Klerk all of a sudden lets Mandela out of prison and says, let's sit down together and create a government, one person, one vote? As well, the political calculus changed for both of them. So he is saying, and of course you remember Tutu, who famously has said, at Sabile conferences and in other places, of course there's hope for the Palestinians. We didn't think that our grandchildren would see the end of apartheid. So if it could happen for us, it can happen for you. Now, my South African friends, when I ask them about this, say, yeah, but what we accomplished is a walk in the park compared to what you were looking at. I mean, think about it. Only the Afrikaners considered themselves the chosen people who had a right to displace an indigenous population and take up for the land. Only the Afrikaners thought of themselves that way. We've got most of the Western world believing that my people are beloved by God more than anybody else, and that the Bible says to take it. So yeah, we've got a bit steeper hill to climb here. And South Africa, well, economically, yeah, there were some investments, but it was a backwater, a small country. It's no way compares to where Israel is in the global economy today. So we're looking at big things. Okay, so why is this important when we're thinking about replacement theology? So when I first got back from my first real trip over there, not that long ago, 2006, some of you have heard the story. So I was giving a talk, one of my first talks, in a Presbyterian church in Washington, D.C., the Fifth Avenue, the New York Avenue Church. Wonderful, big old historic church. It was Lincoln's church. It has an incredible ministry, urban ministry, and other places as well, and a terrific pastor who's very committed to human rights. And so I gave this talk, and he had invited me to do that, and then afterwards he came up to me, and he said, I agree with everything that you're saying, but we have to be sensitive to the feelings of Jews when we talk about these things. And very naively, I looked at him and said, what do you mean? At which point he began to educate me in what's really going on. He said, I have been a pastor all my life. My whole ministry has been dedicated to human rights. And as a Christian and as a pastor, and I've studied, and this guy is a bit of a scholar, I consider that Christianity and the church is responsible for the Holocaust and for Jewish suffering. And I said, yeah, I'm with you on that, absolutely true. And he said, but I work with an interfaith group of clergy, and imams, rabbis, priests, and ministers, and we take on every human rights issue that comes our way, except we leave Palestine off the table, Israel off the table, out of respect for the rabbis. Now, this was my Saul on the road to Damascus moment. I did not, something just hit me. And I didn't even know that I thought these things, but it was really what got me started. And I said to him, Pastor, I appreciate your sensitivity to my people's feelings, but you're going to need to do something else with your Christian guilt. It gets better. The rabbis that you are sitting with, who are basically muzzling you and saying, stay out of our business, don't talk about Israel, are not friends of Israel, and they are not friends of the Jewish people. We are in big trouble here. If we don't figure this out and take this on, I can't speak in synagogues, I said. They won't let me in. It's a disaster for us. And you know that. You asked me to come here and speak. You know the story. He nodded. And I said, the Christians who are sitting with those rabbis and are colluding and enabling that behavior, and I use the word enabling quite consciously, are not friends of Israel and not friends of the Jewish people. We need you to take this on. The church needs to take this on like it takes on any human rights issue. So, okay, he's listening. But I wasn't finished. I said, this is not what Jesus wants you to do. So here's this Jewish psychologist lecturing this Presbyterian pastor about But as those of you who know me, you know, I feel like I come by it honestly. You know, it comes as a revelation to some people that Jesus was a Jew. He was the best Jew. He was the best Jew. I'm going to tell, any Catholics here? Okay, so this is a little bit of a make fun of Catholics joke, but it applies to people in general. So my friend Bill Plitt in Washington, we helped start Friends of 10 of Nations together, and he went to Palestine. He was at that talk in the church in Washington, and he went off to take his pilgrimage right after that. And so he blames me for changing his life. He came back and we started Friends of 10 of Nations together because we were both so blown away by Dawood Nassar. And he tells a story, and I have to believe it's true. So he's sitting with some friends of his back home. Several of them were Catholics, several Catholic ladies. And I can't believe I'm telling this joke in church. All right. But it makes a point. And he was explaining about Palestine today and about the analogies and to what Jesus' ministry in Rome and all of that, the whole context of the Gospels. And he mentioned just offhand, of course, Jesus was a Jew. So these two Catholic ladies, they sort of stepped back and they said, what? Jesus was a Jew? Our Lord and Savior was a Jew? Wasn't that, didn't they? And then, and that whole story. So he very patiently, it's true. Growing up as a Jew, Jesus was a Jew? Gee, when you said the word Jesus, and there's the tragedy of what happened historically, it meant death. It's like people being, if you open up the Quran today, fire's going to come out and consume you, right? That was the way we heard about the Gospels and Jesus. It was bad. That's the tragedy. Anyway, so he very patiently explained to them that Jesus was a Jew. There were no Christians in the first century when Jesus was raised. He was a Palestinian Jew. So they listened carefully and they thought, okay, yeah, all right, yeah, I guess I get it. Okay, so Jesus was a Jew. But not the Holy Mother. I actually believe that this really happened. So we have some reconstruction of history and narrative to do here. Right? Now I forgot where I was. Right, back with my friend in the Presbyterian church. I said, this is not what Jesus would want you to do. Now, and he took about 2 steps back, sort of taking this in. And we have had a very, very good dialogue since then, over the years. In fact, a lot of the books that I critique in my first book, which articulate the training that he got, 30, 40 years ago in seminary, which articulate a theology which elevates Jews and the Jewish people back into the position of chosen and most beloved of God, and the original covenant is in place. We're not talking about 2 covenants or anything. It's certainly not a new law. And as I said, there's a real estate clause in there. As an attempt to make up for, to atone for the Christian sin. And this is what I was reading in these books that he gave me, both from Catholic and Protestant theologians. The Christian sin, which is the sin against the Jews. Now, this makes sense. This is a good thing. The Christian world stood before the ovens of Nazi Germany, of Auschwitz, and said, what have we done? And they saw properly that it was theological, and that this anti-Judaism had infected Christianity, and it was wrong, and it needed to be atoned for, and it needed to be fixed. And so the theology got fixed. I read something by a guy named John Palikowski, who is like maybe one of the premier Catholic theologians. He's in Chicago at the Chicago Theological Union. It's Catholic. And he writes about this, and he said, Vatican II, where the Jews are, absolved of the sin of Jesus' murder, was the last nail. No, it wasn't Vatican II. It was the Vatican's recognition of the state of Israel in 1993, or whenever that was the last nail in the coffin of replacement theology, also known as supersessionism. Think about that. Recognizing the state of Israel fixes anti-Jewish word and deed, doctrine and deed, and absolves the church, Catholic Church in this case. And the Protestants did the same thing. So here's what happened. Because of the horror of confronting that consequence of anti-Semitism, and Hitler couldn't have done it without what the church had already provided, and pretty much the church went along with it. In fact, the Lutheran Church in Germany, not to mention the Catholics, did not submit to National Socialism. The theologians and the clergy, by and large, ran full speed to embrace National Socialism in 1933. When Hitler was elected, they called the Führer the savior. They felt that, they believed that, because they had had it with Weimar, it was modernism, it was evil. Hitler was going to bring back basic, good Lutheran values. I mean, the church has a lot to answer for. Right? Diane made it very clear this morning about what the church had become. So, that needed to be fixed. It was a wake-up call. It was great. But what did the church do? What did the theologians do? What did the ecclesia do? Instead of doing what it needed to do, which is to take a look at the root source of throwing the Jews under the bus, which was Christian exceptionalism. God loves us best. The way we understand John chapter 14, verse 6 is that there's only one way to God, which is not what Jesus meant. He meant just the opposite. Read Brian McLaren on that. Jesus was saying, if you want to be with the Father, be like me, which means embrace everybody. Completely wrong the way it was used. Instead of confronting that and thinking, if we want to go back to Jesus, we need to think about what it means to be truly universalistic, what did the church do? So we will hold on to that. Thank you very much. We really are the only way. Jesus really is the, quote, only way. And we will make a guilt offering to the Jews, and we will make it all better. We're going to give them the land. And that's what happened post-war. So instead of a renunciation of Christian exceptionalism and Christian triumphalism, you get a Judeo-Christian exceptionalism on steroids, and the language is Zionism. And God knows there was a deep well of Christian Zionism to draw on, particularly from the Brits, who had been wanting to get rid of the Jews for centuries, and Christian Zionism was the way, right? Send them over there. There's nobody over there anyway except a bunch of savages. That's what happened. The sin, the Christian sin, was the sin against the Jews, and what had to be gotten rid of was, quote, replacement theology, also called supersessionism, which says that the church had come to replace the Jewish people in God's love. That's bad. And you can't say anything or do anything which would possibly suggest that Christians are saying that we're better than the Jews. But in fact, the Jews are God's chosen people. We all live in the house of Israel. And that's where Ben Gurion's genius in calling the new state Israel comes in, right? He wanted people to be confused, to absolutely confuse the Israelites of the Bible and God's biblical promises, in Genesis and right through the Pentateuch with the modern state of Israel. He was a genius. Don't let anybody tell you that he was, not religious. He might have been a socialist atheist, but boy, he knew how to use religion. He was messianic in that sense. So that's how my education began. I learned that, because when I first heard about, then I started to read the New Testament. You know, I'm 57 or 58 years old, right? I'm reading the New Testament for the first time, and it's blowing my mind. Not to mention the fact that one of the turning points for me when I was over there in that summer was meeting with the people of Seville and being introduced to, you know, who introduced me to Jesus? The Palestinian Christians. Who said, who was Jesus? He was a Palestinian Jew who lived under Roman occupation. That's how I got introduced to Jesus. And I picked up Naim Matik's book. I read it cover to cover. It's a short book, the first one. I think it's the best one he's written. He starts with the New Testament, the Old Testament prophets that I was raised on. He says, what's their message? Social justice. Goes right through to Jesus of Nazareth. What's the message? Social justice, the widow, the poor, the orphan, the dispossessed. And I thought, well, of course I want to be with the Palestinians, and I want to hang out in East Jerusalem, and I can't stand to be in West Jerusalem. This is what I was taught. And this is who Jesus was. And now I'm meeting his real descendants. Not me. I'm descendant from a Caucasian tribe from the 8th century that was converted to Judaism. You want to meet the real Jews, you know, talk to the Palestinians. Not that it matters. This is not about, one thing we learned from Jesus is that it's not about genealogy. It's not about blood. It's not carnality. It's the Spirit. That's Pentecost. So I started to read about this. And I said to somebody, well, explain supersessionism to me again. They said, well, it's the idea that when Jesus came, he articulated something new that was a radical departure from the Judaism of the time. The Jews rejected it, and he went on and it started Christianity, which says that this is for everybody. I said, that doesn't sound like a bad thing. Why is this the great evil? Why is supersessionism? Well, the church took that, and it threw the Jews under the bus to get in with Rome, and we were off and running. Next thing, and let me tell you, I can catalog all the bad guys that killed Jews throughout all the centuries. This is how I was raised. It's the dark side of being Jewish. You learn who victimized you when, and how God saved you, and now we've got Israel. That's Jewish history. Which is one reason why I'm standing here, because I rejected that as an identity. It took the Palestinians to help me realize what it really meant to be a Jew. So here's the bottom line on replacement theology. The way it was used historically by the church was bad. Bad, evil, full stop. We need to step out of this post-Holocaust framework where it's all about penitence and go from penitence, which is tying the hands of Christians and the churches behind its back, and move to prophecy. This is the conversation, the ongoing conversation that I keep having with my friend Roger, who's the pastor. At one point, a couple years ago, I said to him, he said, I can't be with you on this because of what we did to the Jews. I said, Roger, you're over here in penitence. You need to move to prophecy. I got it. That's where we are with this. Anti-Semitism is real. I am not naive about it. It's raising its ugly head again. Guess why? Guess why? And it's being used again by people, Zionists, to tell people, see, they hate us. Come to Israel. You know, it's like Bibi's performance in France. I'm not naive about it. And anti-Semitism, like any form of racism, has to be combated, and we have to be vigilant about it. But that's not what this is about. This is a human rights issue. That's probably the prime issue, not because Palestinian suffering is the worst suffering in the world. It is not. You can go to refugee camps in the Sudan, where I've been, that make Dheisheh look like a country club. It's not about the level of suffering. It's about the fact that this is a systematic, structural violation of human rights and a colonial settler movement that's lasted right into the 21st century, supported by the entire West, principally us. That's why it's such an important issue. And we have the power to do something about it as Americans. And the church has the power to do something about it, just like it did with South Africa and with the civil rights movement. So we have to recontextualize the whole business about replacement theology and supersessionism. And we have to say, yes, that was bad. It was used by the church, but taking up the struggle for Palestinian liberation, and by the way, Jewish liberation from apartheid. Not just the Jewish Israelis, but the whole community here in the United States worldwide, because we're living behind a psychological wall that I was raised in. It's a wall of racism and of them and us and fear and paranoia. We Jews have huge problems with that now. But that's not your problem, that's ours. Your problem is to get out and recontextualize and reframe the Jewish penitent stance about the sins against the Jews and say, that's over here, and it's not over, although we've done a lot of good work about that. We don't curse the perfidious Jews anymore. Probably it still happens somewhere. We're trying to do something about that liturgy. Over here is the call of the Palestinian Christians, just like the call of any oppressed group, that if you really are a follower of Jesus, and you understand Matthew 25, and you understand the Great Commission, you know what you have to do. And the whole thing about replacement theology and supersessionism does not apply. That's another part of history, and you have to put it separately. This is not an interfaith project. This is not an interfaith project. We'll talk more about that later. Now, I've run out of time, so we're not talking about Christian Zionism in particular, but it's really the same story. Christian Zionism is archaic. It's an artifact. In fact, you could say that it's an evil byproduct of that same twisted theology that poisoned the church. It is a way for Christians or people who profess to follow Jesus, to hold on to and to reaffirm what they want desperately, which is the idea that God loves one people best. He wants to live in a house. He wants to live in a house. He wants you to build that house on a particular mountain, worship him there, and by the way, worship your own house that you built on a particular mountain. Now, I know what Jesus would do if he came back to Jerusalem today. People say, what would Jesus do if he came back? He might stand on the Mount of Olives and shed a few tears, but then he'd get to work. He'd stand in front of the Knesset building, and he'd say, destroy this temple. Now, Jesus is not talking about bombs. He's not talking about that kind of physical terrorism, although maybe he is talking about a kind of political terrorism, right? It's liberation. Jesus talked, you read the Gospels, talking to the woman at the well, who says, well, I thought you worship on this mountain. And he said, woman, no more mountains. No more houses to God. We will all worship in the Spirit. That's Christianity. And it's time for Christians to reclaim that and to be unapologetically Christian about the radical departure that Jesus took from the Judaism of his time. And he did introduce a new, quote, law. That's the challenge for Christianity today and for the church today. And I think it comes up in every generation, but it's certainly true now. Okay, so you have handouts.
In your packets, you'll find a sheet on the left-hand side that says Breakout Number 1, Theology Matters. There are 2 discussion questions, one about Christian Zionism and one about replacement theology. And what we'll do is split the room in half. So tables 1 through 7 will discuss Christian Zionism, and tables 8 through 15 and the people at the long table in the back will discuss replacement theology. And we'll gather again in about 20 minutes to report back on what you all come up with.
We've got 20 minutes until lunch, so we know not every group will necessarily be able to give a report. So we know half of the room is Christian Zionism, the other half is supersessionism. So are there maybe 2 or 3 tables that you just had such a great thing to report that you really want to be heard? Yes, okay. Will you come up, Lisa? I'd love to have you come. And then we'll do that same one over here, and you're going to have to jump for the microphone.
Our table talked about,
Right up against the mic.
our table discussed how much Christian Zionism undergirds our American political system and actions. And it's moved beyond being a religious movement. And one of the questions we wrestled with was, how do we talk to people who hold these beliefs unquestioningly, implicitly? They've heard this all their lives from the media and from our politicians. How do we have a conversation with people who don't even consider themselves Christian Zionists but hold these beliefs?
This is a really important point. Who spoke about this the other night in Portland? I think it was Cecily Sarasky from Jewish Voice for Peace. She said, why is there such a close relationship between America and Israel? Yeah, there's political stuff, there's economic stuff going on, but we've got the same DNA in terms of the founders and what they did despite some of the founding principles of democracy and equality. We were the shining city on the hill, and we were going to rid the land of the savages. And so there's a real interlocking between American narratives and American DNA and modern Zionism. So we sort of come by it in that way. Of course, there's the First Peoples narrative that goes along with that as well. So it's not just politics. There's a strong sort of ideological and religious component to the connection as well.
We talked about that question as well, and about how do you, what can you possibly say that will be effective? And Lloyd related a story where if you're short on time, just simply, it's not in the New Testament. The claim to the land is not in the New Testament.
I just have to add, one of my favorite little one-liners is something I heard a delightful young woman who is from an evangelical theological point of view. She said about this very subject, I will see you Genesis 12 and raise you Ephesians 2. And you may just go look that up and find out what she meant if those don't ring a bell. So how about from this side, from the supersessionism and replacement theology, is there a table that has something? Please.
Particularly the comment that Mark referred to, the woman at the well, and where do you worship on the mountain? We talked about what does it mean, we actually asked it as the question of discussion. Number one, what does it mean to be God's people, period? And then secondly, by extension, what does it mean to be God's people when referring particularly to who can live on the land and what type of life do people lead as God's people on that area of land?
Thank you.
So that was what we presented as a discussion topic.
Very good. Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? Can I ask a follow-up question? So you're asking the question, what does it mean to be God's people, and what is the role of the land in being God's people? Okay, so that's an important theme which you will often hear from a progressive point of view, which is, yes, there is a land promise. That's okay, because the land is the stage upon which the chosenness and the original mission and the covenant is acted out. And don't forget that part of the deal, part of the covenant is, yes, I will give you the land, but you have to obey my law, which means you have to be kind to the stranger who's on the land. And don't forget that if you leave my laws in any particular way, worshiping idolatry and everything, I'll kick you out. And the land, in fact, will vomit you out in Leviticus. But then, of course, you get to come back when you're good again. So be careful about this, because people will often say, it's called the Deuteronomic conditionality. You get the land. That promise is valid. It's in force. But it's conditional on you remaining my people and obeying my law. The way I feel about this, and I just had an argument with Walter Brueggemann about it, actually. That's often introduced as a way to mitigate or soften the privilege and the land promise. Don't forget it's conditional. You have to be good boys and girls or you'll lose the land. But it's never taken off the table. There's always a restoration that's there, ready for you. And if you follow the Old Testament narrative, it ends with the restoration of the exiles to the land, and they are going to rebuild the temple. That's as far as you get with the Old Testament. And this gets back to the replacement theology business again, because Jesus and the temple becoming body of Christ, and that's like gone? What happened to that? Okay?
With that kind of theology, there's going to be constant battle. One time you're going to kick them off, next time you're going to come back, I'm good now, I want this land back. So there will never be peace.
That's correct. That's correct. The whole New Testament revolution and departure from that was, we are done with that. And don't forget on Pentecost, Jesus says, what happens on Pentecost, right? The Holy Spirit appears, and remember what the apostles said when Jesus said, go to Jerusalem and wait for power will be given to you from the Holy Spirit, right? And remember what they say to him, what they ask him? Lord, are you going to restore the kingdom to Israel? We're going to get our king back. We're going to get Jerusalem back. We'll get the whole deal back again. And Jesus said, yeah, whatever. Just go to Jerusalem. And then what happens on Pentecost? When the Holy Spirit does come, does it come in the form of a king? Flames, tongues of fire, knocks them to the ground, and they get up, and what's happened? Speaking all the languages of the known world. And what's the last one on the list, by the way? Arabic. You're now going to speak all the languages of the world. Now get the hell out of Jerusalem. Do not pass go through Judea and Samaria and go into the wide world. What about this message does the church not understand? That old thing is over. No more restoration, no more land, no more God living in the house, there's no more land. And the land, as Lloyd points out, it's not in the Old Testament. Read Gary Burge, he should be on the list. Gary Burge, B-U-R-G-E, Jesus and the land. And what he says is, read the Old Testament, it is an anti-territorial polemic. That's what it means to be unapologetically Christian. You are done with the land. It becomes entirely symbolic. If you want to read Revelation, it's about Jerusalem being totally a spiritual concept.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to ask the question. I think, to my knowledge, there are about 14 million Jews in the whole world today. And also, I read somewhere that nearly half of them do not even believe in God at all, like they are atheists. The issue now is, as I understand it, is that actually many Jews, including the ones who live in Palestine themselves, do not really want to live there. Many Jews outside, and that's the influence here in America, are supporting it because when the next Holocaust happens, they will just jump on airplanes and fly to Israel because it will be the safe place where they are sitting. Right. So unless you deal with this psychology, for those people whom half of them do not even believe in God at all, we are not really dealing with the problem. It's fine with the church to say we need a replacement theology, but in reality, the issue is actually more psychological than theological. So we have to deal with the psychology of the issue. One, just a small note, please, before you speak. I find it offending when anybody utters the word anti-Semitism, because we are Semites too. Why can't you just say anti-Jewishness? I think you're all smart enough and you don't look like idiots or anything. Just say anti-Jewishness and don't say anti-Semitism, because I actually consider the people who use the word anti-Semitism only for the Jews to be anti-Semitic, because you're actually anti-me. Every time you say the word anti-Semitism and you speak about the Jews, you are actually anti-Semitic yourself.
Well, I know it was a rhetorical question you asked. You don't look like we're idiots, but there was a time. I mean, I'm old enough to have gone through 48, the 67 war, and everything else, and I can tell you that one of the things we talked about at our table was how absolutely ignorant we were. Absolutely. Of what was going on. We didn't even know what Zionism was. We thought it was something really great. I mean, wow, this was really something. My father was a minister, and unfortunately, as many people were influenced in that day by dispensationalism. And so 1948, wow, Israel is going to be a nation and God is fulfilling prophecies. And then we had in the 70s, remember Hal Lindsey and the late great Planet Earth and all of this stuff and these kinds of things. This is how we were raised, and it wasn't necessarily political, we didn't think, but it certainly had political ramifications. And then it's only been recent, folks, that some of us have come to an understanding of the actual history of Zionism and what was going on. And Stephen Sizer, if you know his work on Zionism, has helped, and various others, as well as our speakers today. So, you know, I guess there's a before ignorance and after ignorance phase that we can see very clearly in our lives.
Who else from this side of the room, please? Louder.
I'm going from the note sheet for scribes, and the first was major themes of topics discussed, and we had a chosen group is not what Jesus taught. He taught universalism. Then we had there is no realty clause in the Bible. No one group is special. The church does not replace Israel or Judaism. And some Orthodox Jews didn't even recognize or don't recognize the state of Israel until the Messiah comes. So there's even within Judaism differences on that. Down further? There? Okay. So the most important message from this that we got was universality of all people in creation is the most important aspect of Jesus. And then under what can we do in the future, there is a Sabile conference on Christian Zionism in Vancouver, BC, starting the evening of April 23rd to the afternoon of April 25th, and we have contact information for anyone who wants to know about that and going to that. And it will have a far more extensive ability to go into depth on that.
Thank you, Val. Thank you. I just want to mention something in response to what Val said. From my point of view, the theological issues that we're talking about are very, very important, because we as people of faith, those of us that put ourselves in that category, which is most of the people in this room, need to work through these issues in order to reclaim our sense of authority for what we say about what we're doing. Ultimately, in my opinion, this becomes it is one state. It's a political issue, it's a land issue, it is not going to be solved by people of different faith singing Kumbaya. It's going to be solved by people of faith really wrestling with these issues so that we can work through them and reclaim our authority and understand why we are called into this struggle for human rights.
I'll expand briefly on one of the points we concluded in our group, and that's the core difference between Christian denominations today is not the denominational background, but those who are interested in finding out, who believe the gospel tells us how to get out of here, and those of us who understand that the gospel has to do with how we care for the world. And the history of that very clearly is that any religion who becomes associated with the state loses its core integrity. It was true of the church with the Roman Empire, and now it's true of Israel with the Israeli state. That our challenge is to make clear that in fact it is we who are opposed to Christian Zionism that has really affirmed the integrity of Judaism, because through 19th century German scholarship we discovered that Jesus did not come to tell us how to get out of here. That Jesus came in order to fulfill the purpose of Israel, and here I might disagree a little bit, that you can find in the Old Testament the story of the man who was swallowed by the whale, and the message that he was saying is that, look, we are called by God to go out to the nations, our enemies, to go beyond Israel, that security is not our primary concern. And it's that strain of the Torah, of the prophets, that Jesus took up and said, we can't hold on to what we have to hang loose to go out further. And that we join our Jewish brothers who say the mission of Israel is truly understood as tikkun olam, caring for the world. And now we in our mainline churches, and since Vatican II, the Catholic Church, are saying our mission is to care for the world, while our Christian Zionist friends are still caught up in this state Roman religion which says our job is to get us out of here. And it's very clear from any scholarship you want to read that Jesus was not here to tell us how to get out of here, but to care for the rest of creation, because that is what God's concerned about, the whole of creation and all of humanity.
Well preached, Josh. And we'll have a conversation. We'll have a conversation about Jonah later. Are you guys really prepared to be such heretics and really, really go with Jesus? I mean, you realize you're like swimming against the tide here? It's wonderful. Okay. Lunch is going to be ready in 5 to 8 minutes. In the meantime, there is a piece of paper being distributed to your tables. Everybody gets one. And I'm going to quickly sort of give you a preview of where we're going to be ending up today, where we're going today in terms of what it means in terms of Kairos communities. And we're going to ask you before lunch, as your meal ticket, those of you who have something to say about it, to fill this in and to get in line for lunch. Okay. So I started off this morning channeling what Don Sullivan had told me about what it means to be the church. One concept of, one way to express the idea of the true church, the real church, again was articulated by Martin Luther King Jr. in the letter from Birmingham jail, where he talks about his disappointment with the church. King talks about how disappointed and despairing he almost was with what had happened to the church, how it was supporting racism. And this is what he articulates, and he talks about the whole concept of the beloved community, which I understand from someone he actually took from somebody else and didn't credit. Maybe somebody in the room knows who first came up with the concept of beloved community. Maybe it was Jesus. The true ecclesia. So the real church is what the church was originally. This reminds me also of what the South Africans told me when I said, I visited there a couple of years ago. I said, tell us how you did it, because I want to bring this back to the churches in the United States. I was talking to church people who had been through the anti-apartheid struggle, had suffered enormously. He said, well, here's what you need to remember. We were never united. Sometimes it felt like it was just a half a dozen of us in the front, suffering and marching forward. We were never united, and we were a minority, and we prevailed because we were the true church, and justice was on. We were working for justice, okay? And then King comes back to this concept of the beloved community multiple times in his writings and in his speeches, and it's always in the context of talking about nonviolence, nonviolent direct action. He hardly can ever say one without saying the other. That's what the church does. It is a group performing nonviolent direct action, resistance with the language of with the logic of love. That is the whole basis of a global Kairos movement that has grown up in response to the Palestinian call of 2009. That's why we're here today. That's why Kairos USA exists. If you take a look at the document that was written in 2012, it says, a U.S. response to Kairos Palestine. In our own context, with our own confession. And so Kairos USA, in some sense, is not a new organization. It's not about being an organization. It's not about elbowing aside other organizations that are doing good things. It's about, in fact, bringing together and enabling the work that's already being done by Sabeel and by the St. Mark's Committee and by local groups throughout the United States that are working ecumenically. And you can find them everywhere. So part of what we're doing here today is community organizing. What's going on in Seattle? What do you all need? What, if that's where you're going, do you want to create, starting here today in this room, with the people who are assembled here, whether you already belong to a church-based organization like the St. Mark's folks, or whether you've been doing that work in isolation, or with some other in some other community context. What's happening here in Seattle? And where do you go from here? And that's what we're going to be working on this afternoon. And Kairos USA is providing a framework called the Kairos Community, which connects you not only with other groups within the United States, but with Kairos groups that are springing up all over the world, in South Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in India, in Southeast Asia, in Canada, in Latin America, and throughout Europe. It's a global movement. Think anti-apartheid. Okay? And so, if you take a look at the brochures, the Kairos USA brochures that you have, this is basically what's on the brochure. You join the Kairos community, quote, here's what you get. But it kind of goes beyond this. It's a matter of how do you want to be connected. So take a look at these, and then go to the sheet that's in front of you, and fill it out. Not everybody has to do this. But if you want to be counted and you want to be contacted and you want to be on record as wanting to kind of identify and join, then fill this out as, just take a few minutes and then have those pieces of paper brought up to the front table. Any questions about this? Or if you do, just come on up and we'll talk about it. But just take 5 minutes. Yes, Mary. The 6 things, I think, are the action steps, aren't they? Yeah, no, we're talking about in the brochure, the middle section of the brochure that talks about Kairos community, and it talks about the benefits, okay? What do you need, and how can connecting with Kairos? Okay, everybody's got a copy of this. It's a fourfold brochure, right? If you open it up twice, it says join the Kairos community. And the message basically is, what do you need? Tell us what you need. So 5 minutes. If you want to work on it more over lunch, that's fine, but it should end up on this front table. It's the post-lunch session, always a challenge. But let me just make a couple of points, the ones that I sort of feel like a broken record about. A couple of my broken record issues, things that I feel like I have to keep saying over and over and over again. And that usually is in response to questions. So one question would be, and I'll get this especially from clergy, but from lay people as well, Christian. We agree with everything you're saying. We know that there is a huge problem with Israel, and that the Palestinians are suffering, and that they're paying the price for the Holocaust, and all of that. And we agree with you that the church can be a really, really powerful force in being part of a grassroots global movement of nonviolent resistance, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, can you tell us about some Jewish groups or Jewish leaders that can work with us on this? Now, what's the assumption behind that question? Or the feeling behind that question? I will take this on, but only if I've got Jews walking beside me, and only if we can do this as a, quote, interfaith project. And of course, you know what that's about. That's about, I just don't want to pay the price. And it's too big of a price to pay. That's my point about it not being an and besides, we've been working with the synagogue for years, and we have very good, close relationships with the synagogues. And there's the other issue that's coming up, which is, you're asking me to do this, and especially if it's a question of the pastor of, First Presbyterian of wherever. That's a precious relationship. We've been working on this for generations to build bonds of trust and reconciliation with the Jewish community on institutional as well as personal levels. It's going to blow it up. I raised it with my rabbi colleague a couple of years ago or whatever, and boy, I'm not going to do that again. I mean, all of a sudden, all that nice, warm, fuzzy stuff that was going on between us, and we'll come to your Easter services, and you come to our Seder, and all that's good stuff. And it is good stuff. All of a sudden, there's this dark cloud, and it's like, back off, that's our business, no more discussion. It's very traumatic, very painful, kind of shocking, hot stove. But now you're pushing this again, and all this stuff is happening, and we hear that the Methodists and the Presbyterians are divesting, and all this stuff. Or somebody comes up to me and says, my best friend from college, this is like a 30-year-old relationship, my best friend, she's Jewish, and all of a sudden, it's horrible. I can't talk about it. I read something, and all of a sudden, everything changed. Or my Jewish son-in-law at the dinner table. And, there's a short answer to this for me, which is I know you're asking for a comforting response. Tell me how I can do this without paying that price, because I'm not sure I'm ready or willing or able to pay that price. And my answer is, I have no words of comfort for you. This is a cross. Who said it was supposed to be easy? And this may be tougher than crosses you've had to pick up in the past. And I just think, and I think that's the word to use. It's not your fault. You did not set that up. You did not make these rules up. But there are rules. They're unwritten. They're unspoken for the most part. But there are very clear rules, and there are very clear red lines. Most of you have already, gotten bloodied by them. And I don't think there is a way around it. And I can't tell you what to do about that. We Jews have our own family business to take care of. It's really serious. It's really, really serious. I think we're facing a confrontation with our own identity, our own faith, our own institutional realities that makes the Protestant Reformation look like child's play in some ways. And we got to deal with that, and I don't know what's going to happen. Obviously, we got to walk away from Zionism and forgive ourselves for it. It's easily said, not so easily done. But I think that's our business. And again, I'll say it again what I said this morning. Over here, you've got the interfaith issue, which is Christian penitence for anti-Jewishness in doctrine and in deed. And that's putting it mildly. Over here is a human rights issue and a ministry for the church that it's called to do. Full stop. Can't walk away from it. The problem, the tragedy, and it's going to get worse, is that the whole strategy, the foundation of Israel's diplomatic, geopolitical strategy, and it's been that way since they got Truman to push for partition, is to make sure that nobody fails to confuse the state of Israel and the Jewish people with one another. They are one. Or Judaism and Zionism. They are one. Wonderful story from Tony Judt. Who knows who Tony Judt was? Read about him. J-U-D-T. British Jew, ended up his life here in America, died tragically, too young. Wrote a towering, groundbreaking article in the London Review of Books that couldn't get it published in this country, called, I forget what it's called, Israel the something, where he talked about Israel the Alternative. Okay, 2003, just Google it, J-U-D-T. He's a historian. He wrote wonderful, wonderful books, although he's a little bit too committed to the idea of social democracies, but that's another story. Anyway, he tells a story. He was giving a talk at Brandeis, and this must have been, 10, 15 years ago, and somebody from the audience, this is Brandeis University, right? Somebody got up and accused him as a non-Israeli of making pronouncements about Israel and criticizing Israel. He said, you don't have a right to do that. You don't live there. And shut up. And he said, no. You're absolutely wrong about that. I am a Jew. I have a total right to talk about this. And let me tell you a story. He said, I was in New York. This was in the late 80s. And I was sitting at some sort of fancy dinner, and I was sitting next to the outgoing ambassador to the United States from the State of Israel. And he was bragging to me that he had accomplished his mission. And what was his mission as the Israeli diplomat to the United States of America? To make sure that nobody ever failed to confuse the State of Israel with the Jewish people or Zionism with the Jewish faith. He said, that was my diplomatic mission. And it continues to be the key diplomatic card that the State of Israel has to play. And that's what you're going to continue to confront. So when people accuse you of being anti-Semitic, all you have to say is, first of all, you have to be very offended. Unless you happen to be an anti-Semite, and I use that word because it's pretty much recognized as meaning anti-Jewish. But if somebody accuses you of being an anti-Semite, and that's the word they'll probably use, be offended and say, and yes, I absolutely am against the policies of the State of Israel, and I've heard it from fellow Christians as well as from many Jews, that doesn't make me an anti-Semite. And there are many, many Jews that do not identify with the State of Israel, do not base their identity, say that their identity is inextricably bound up with the State of Israel itself, or even with the idea that we're supposed to go home to Palestine. And that before 1948, and certainly before World War II, most of organized Judaism, the major denominations, the Reform Jews, which still is the biggest denomination in this country, was officially not only non-Zionist, but anti-Zionist. We do not agree, read it, it's called the Pittsburgh Platform. We do not agree with the idea that our faith should be tied up with nationalism. It's not what being Jewish is about. We want to be a faith community just like you Protestants. It gets a little confusing with the Catholic Church, but still, to talk about Protestants, it's safe. We want to be a faith community just like you Protestants, just like we were in Germany before the war. We were assimilated as in a diverse society. The idea of Israel as a national state and as a Jewish state is wrong. It all changed. It changed dramatically, and that's where the psychology comes in. So let me just say something about the psychology, and then let's have a conversation. I talked about the dark side of being Jewish, right? Okay, I love being Jewish. I was raised very traditionally, went to Jewish schools. I can open up the Bible and read it in the original Hebrew. I grew up in the synagogue. I can't go back there now because the liturgy is too exceptionalistic, and I can't go back to the synagogue because it worships Israel. The synagogue is not open to me, even the most progressive. But I love being Jewish, and I'll always be Jewish, and that's just the way it is. The dark side was that what I learned about being Jewish was it's as if my grandmother's DNA from Europe was just, injected into me. The world is dangerous. The Goyim, you know what Goyim are, right? The Gentiles are basically an ignorant, drunken rabble who want to kill me. Be careful. Stay with your own kind. And you have two major enemies that you single out. There's the German people because of what they did to us, and the Arabs, as we call them, because of what they will do to us if we don't have Israel. That was who I was supposed to be. Which is why for me, the grace happened when I finally met the Palestinian people, the so-called enemy. And that's what I think turned me around. Even more than seeing the evil of the occupation was to meet this enemy. I mean, so many of you have had this experience. But for me, especially as a Jew, it was overwhelming and very, very powerful and kind of shattering in some ways because I had to figure out who I was. So I'm saying this because one thing you need to understand about Jewish psychology, certainly Israelis, because they've been raised that way, but for Jews in general, and this is part of what we have to overcome, and as a recovering psychologist, I understand this really well. We are a case of collective, undiagnosed, unresolved post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, we know now, thanks to the Vietnam veterans, what PTSD is. We know that the symptomatology is shared across the board with victims of domestic violence, childhood abuse, natural disasters. The symptomatology is very well known in our culture now. And it has to do with all kinds of emotional problems, but also the real deep issue is that there's a deep, profound damage to the ability to trust and to make attachments with people. When something happens to you, either cumulatively over time or in one gulp, individually or collectively, what is threatened, and the real injury is deeply psychological, and it's really kind of a soul injury. How can this happen to me? How can other people do this to me? How can I live in the world? Where is God? That happens to people too. Why am I not safe? I thought it was safe. I thought I could trust. And that's the healing that has to happen to people. We learned this with the combat veterans. We certainly know this about victims of childhood abuse and domestic abuse. You have to learn to trust again. Now, we know what the treatment of choice is. Getting together with other people who've suffered this way, being in some sort of trusting relationship, is slowly you can start to work through the injury and find a way back, scarred, different, but find a way back into being in a relationship and finding a way to trust again. We know what is not indicated and what the treatment of choice is not. And in the case of the Jews, it is not to take the survivors of genocide or if 2,000 years of marginalization and oppression and humiliation and fear, put them in a fortress, build the walls higher, station soldiers on the wall, and say, stay in here, it's not safe out there, they hate you, we'll keep you safe, trust no one. That's Israel today. And the citizens of Israel, and by extension, the Jewish community at large, because that's what in order to, quote, preserve Israel as a safe haven because it's Hitler's coming, right? Or Nasser's coming, or Ahmadinejad's coming, or somebody's coming, there's always one. So by extension, the Jewish community at large is taught, trust no one, anti-Semitism is alive. See, they just did it again. See, they just did it again. But especially if you're talking to the citizens of Israel, there is an existential fear. They fear that the Palestinians, stateless, no army, right? Totally put down, that the Palestinians are going to come and kill us. And they believe it, and they believe it's happening tomorrow, unless they have the Israeli army and the state of Israel to protect them. So you need to understand that that is the existential reality and the psychological reality of Jewish Israelis and sort of by default kind of Jews in general until they have a chance to examine it and maybe see that something is different and like me, be able to meet the so-called enemy. That's a tough one. It's tough in particular if you're being told, boycott Israel. Boycott these poor people who already believe that the world is against them, and you're going to make them even more scared and all of that stuff, and you're going to solidify their resolve and their deep belief that they need Israel even more now because, look, the world is turning against us. All true. All true. And it's not your problem, and there's nothing you can do about it. And as a Jew who feels enormous pain about what's happening to my friends and my cousins and my family, and I have a huge family in Israel, about what's happened to them, that, you look into the eyes of these kids at the checkpoints, look into their eyes, it's not pretty. If the eyes are not dead, then the eyes are full of fear and hatred. It's not pretty. So I mourn about that. They deserve better. The Jews who left Europe and went to Israel and went to Palestine, and have family members who were like that, my mother's siblings. They were either highly idealistic socialists who wanted to form a perfect society, or they were refugees themselves from an inhospitable Europe. They thought they were, they thought they were going to start something good. They didn't know that they were being recruited and inducted and used in a racist, ethnic nationalist project run by a brilliant, crazy, messianic fanatic named Ben-Gurion. They didn't know that they were being inducted into that, and this dream has turned into a nightmare. They deserve to be rescued from that. So that's the interfaith wrap. So let's have, yes, Diane.
I would like to add this. We've entitled this section Interfaith Relations, and sometimes we should notice where our attention is being pointed and what's being left aside. Our attention is pointed to Jewish-Christian relationships. There are Muslims that we are free to ignore, and I think that we understand that is a sin. I don't believe that. We are told by the silence, don't worry about that problem. Make sure you're right between Jews and Christians. I want to raise the fact that this interfaith world needs to include our obligation and opportunity to get to know our Muslim neighbors and the quality of Muslim faith. And when you look in our Kairos USA booklet, the section about interfaith relations, you will see reference to something we call Islamophobia. And it's very real. Talk about existential fear and the differential between how atrocities are measured and noticed and covered. I don't think I need to say more. The 3 dental students of recent note illustrate my point. People can be executed, and it's chalked up to a parking dispute. And so this is one of our problems. This is one of the things that is our task. And I think it's just very easy to ignore that. So I want to raise it. I want to direct you to that section in our Kairos USA booklet that discusses it. And when we hear about something called the ecumenical deal, that we Christians will be quiet about Palestine for the sake of our relationship with our Jewish neighbors, that the one that kind of gets left out of that whole ecumenical deal is the Muslims. And so I just want to raise it.
Okay, just to piggyback on what Diane just said. We Palestinians don't distinguish between Christians and Muslims. So as we are talking about the Kairos call from the Christian Palestinians, let us not forget that their call was for all Palestinians, not just for the Christian Palestinians.
Thank you.
And actually, I just heard recently that we are envied in some other countries in the Middle East for the lack of distinction between Christian and Muslim in Palestine, which doesn't happen apparently in other countries of the Middle East. But in any case, I just wanted everybody to know that this does include in our Palestinian thinking, it does include Muslims, because we all are one peoples.
Thank you.
Yeah, also another statement, and that is that even though everything that Mark Braverman said is true, I think there's something to be added, that there are people in the Jewish community that can be worked with in the States. There's Jewish Voice for Peace, and you can go to their website for some very good resources, and they recently fully endorsed the 2005 BDS call in full. And in Canada, Independent Jewish Voices. There's also ultra-Orthodox Jews who are anti-Zionist. I won't get into them right now, but they do exist. So don't be discouraged that there's no Jews that you can actually recruit to go together if you don't feel secure on your own.
Thank
Even
you.
if you do.
Thank you. Libby, do you have a question?
Yeah, it was from Mark, and it was along the lines that she just mentioned is, have you met other Jews that share your views, maybe more on a personal level as well as organizational?
Yes, there are a lot of us. We are not in charge of the Jewish institutions who claim to speak for all of us, but there are many of us. Jewish Voice for Peace, of course, is a very good example. It claims that it's not a Jewish organization, and in fact, it does include non-Jews. It's not a Jewish faith organization. It's more kind of an identity kind of thing. But they're very, very active, and they really do represent some of the voices of Jews in this country. What's missing is any kind of institutional Jewish voice in terms of the philanthropic and social service organizations like the federations, and that's what the federation is, the advocacy organizations that were founded in the early 20th century to combat anti-Semitism, and of course, the denominations. So we don't have that institutionally, and you can't find it, and you're not going to have it. If you wait for that, you'll wait too long. So that's sort of my caution. The strategy, the organizing strategy here is to organize the churches institutionally, through the denominations, through local groups like yours, of people who identify as part of a faith community, to become part of a grassroots movement, because there is real power in that. Unless things change dramatically and radically, and I don't see that happening soon, you're not going to be able to do that with working with institutional Judaism in this country, and probably nowhere in the world right now. And so that's the point I'm making. The whole interfaith project has been taking place on institutional levels, synagogue to church, denomination to denomination, secular but Jewish organizations relating to other Christian organizations and to governmental, and political entities. That you don't have that, and you're not going to have that. You're on your own as a church and as institutional Christianity, even if you are minorities within the institutions. You're on your own. You're not going to get the Jewish community to walk with you as the, quote, organized Jewish community. As far as the Muslim community is concerned, I also think that the dialogue and the connections, as Diane said, have to continue among everybody, including faith communities and so-called secular communities that feel like they don't want to relate to these religious types. I mean, I think we have to have alliances that are going on across those lines, and I think that's very important. And Muslims have their own issues institutionally to deal with in this country, and until recently, most mosques and Muslim organizations were keeping their heads down and being quiet about Palestine for obvious reasons, because it was not and still is not all that safe to be a Muslim in this country, and that's some of the gains that were made are now we're seeing going away with the latest political things that are going on. I'm very inspired and moved by the emergence of organizations like American Muslims for Palestine, because that's incredibly courageous, and I think those are powerful allies to have. And you can have alliances with Jewish Voice for Peace, and in Canada there are powerful but strong minority beleaguered Jewish groups as well. But again, they are not connected with the institutional reality of Judaism now.
At this point, we'll move on to breakout number 2, and there is a page called breakout number 2 in your folders. This time, we won't break into the 2 groups. Everybody will have the same question. You'll stay at your tables and discuss the questions amongst yourselves. And it does, there is a reading on page 12 in this book that you'll begin with. Again, you should ask a person to be the scribe so that later when we all come back together, your scribe can stand up and share your thoughts.
Just quickly, there's no one single magic way to do that. I think that we need to be on a one-to-one conversation with those people that are in our family or in our neighborhood or that we work with. The only idea I can give you is to listen well, listen to what they say. I'm going to quote a really smart JVP organizer who gave a presentation this week that I heard, Cecily Zaworski. Mark has already mentioned her. She said, listen well and try to find points of connection. When they speak of the fear and anxiety and horror of their experience, the intense desire for safety, we can understand that. Try to join people at the place where you can be united and try to express your story of your commitment to the issue of the Palestinians in a personal, emotive, vivid way. The one thing that she advised us the other night is going fact to fact, giving each other barrages of facts will rarely be the key thing that changes a mind. She also said you will never change a mind or a point of view by shaming the other or proving how wrong they are. That the change comes when we can meet on a human basis and find points of understanding, and when we get better at describing what is the content of our passionate commitment, and is there a story that you carry around with you that maybe we need more practice in telling, that explains why you've come to have another point of view. That's the best I can do at the moment.
I cannot do any better.
Okay. Please.
Hard time getting a hold of these questions. We finally focused on table 13. We finally is it on? Okay. We finally focused on question number 3, how the thoughts and feelings that we were having actually right now, I think, as a result of the conference, were affecting us in relation to what we think of and how we talk about Palestine and Israel. I think what we came up with is that we're aware, and I'm picking up on some themes that have been touched on, is that we're aware to the impediments or the obstacles to action and the need for a little self-examination, I guess. And we see these as obstacles that we all have to address. One is we all avoid facing the shameful things that we've done to anyone, especially the other, and that would include the Native Americans, the blacks, now the Muslims, certainly the Asian population during World War II. But we can think of many examples. And we avoid thinking or talking about anything that threatens our comfort or our security, our material prosperity, our employment. We have difficulty accepting any group that competes with us in our majority view, and anything that is not politically correct. And there's just this natural tendency to avoid conflict at all costs. So we need to think about those things when we start thinking, why am I not making much headway? So I think we all agreed that these have to be addressed before we can really have a significant impact on the issues. And just as an aside, I just want to also mention that I have a little booklet. It's on the table.
Thank you.
Well, it was published by the Bishops' Committee for Israel-Palestine. It's called Promised Land or Land of Promise, and it's on the table.
Thank you for saying that. And I'm going to take a point of order for the other authors that are here in the room. Come get in line and just quickly identify yourself and tell us what your book is, because I think we deserve to know who you are and you deserve to be known. So just get in line. But the next person in line, if you can come, and then following, we'll meet another author. Thank you. No, you don't have to be an author. I just want you to see who the authors are.
But and I don't have a lot more to add to what's already been said. I don't have a lot more to add to what's already been said, except that we were grappling with how do we talk to our Jewish friends about this issue. It was raised that you don't talk about, it's not polite to talk about religion and politics, and yet that's exactly what this is. And so how do we do that? And we talked about tending our own Christian garden, and plenty of work to be done there, and that by doing that, then we are powerful, then we have something powerful to add. And another comment that was made that I thought was great was, so if you just say what your heart tells you and speak your truth, and then let God take care of what might need to happen, but not to have to apologize. Another person talked about the interfaith activities that have gone on since the mid-20th century, and how powerful those are, but sometimes those can derail us and be an excuse. So let's see what else. One person said, call a spade a spade. And then we also talked about the importance of maintaining our relationships with people we disagree with. And how do we do that? And how can we speak from maybe our own, like I think what you mentioned about our own personal experiences and from our hearts, and make sure that we are maintaining our friendship, but not being silent about what we really feel. I think that's about it.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. You've raised a key issue, and I don't know, I seem to be the bearer of bad news, but sometimes we have to look at those things. As our movement grows, as I said, the opposition is going to grow, and a lot of this is happening on institutional levels. The denominations are they are breaking the rules that have been established for generations, and so the card that is being played by the counterparts in the Jewish institutions, the denominations, and the whole network of Jewish institutional entities, which some people just call the lobby. Rabbi, senior moment, wonderful guy, he said, if you think about the Israel lobby, you need to think about, and this is a sad thing to say, you need to think about all the Jewish institutional organizations that have nothing to do with political lobbies, but they are part of the whole complex of organizations and institutions that are linked together, that are definitely being very, very powerful advocates. And now they are really, really focused on stopping BDS in all of its forms, stopping anybody who's breaking the rules of Jewish-Christian reconciliation and friendship. And that's the card that's being played. I was at the Presbyterian General Assembly in Detroit last year, and Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who is the president of the largest, most powerful Jewish organization in this country, at least the one that's out front about being the most powerful one, and that's the Reform Judaism, got up in front of the whole General Assembly of the Presbyterians and said, our hearts bleed for the Palestinians too, but the most important thing here is our friendship, and together we can fix this. But our friendship is the key value, and you must not do anything to hurt our friendship. And that is what we're confronting, and I think that that's going to get more intense. That's what you're going to be asked to continue to embrace. Basically, the message is, but we thought you were our friends. I have a lot of compassion for you about that. That's all I can say. But that's what you're going to be confronted with.
And I think the thing I would say is I am still your friend. I'm not taking my friendship away. I'm speaking what is very, very important. Another author in our midst.
So, the book I have is Refusing to Be Enemies, Palestinian and Israeli Nonviolent Resistance to the Israeli Occupation. And most of the words in this book are not mine, besides 4 analytic essays by Hassan Andoni, Jeff Halper, Jonathan Kutab, and Starhawk. There are excerpts from interviews with over 100 Palestinian and Israeli nonviolent activists. So it's available over on the table next to the table with most of the books, $18, which is cost, not what you'll pay online, and I hope some people will look at it.
Thank you. I think we have time for another report if there is another table that has some things they'd like to share.
Hey, we are table number 8, so we're a mixture of a lot of different kind of people, but a few of us are students from SPU, Seattle Pacific University, which is a, thanks. And our professor, Dr. Thorpe, is here as well. And so we kind of talked about, at least I shared a little bit about how I grew up in a more evangelical fundamentalist background, and a lot of the assumptions about Israel and the Jews are just that, they're assumptions. They're kind of givens, I guess, in the conversation. And so, you know, I was talking to my former teaching pastor over Christmas break and about this conference I was going to, not this one, another one with World Vision, which we'll be discussing in a breakout session. Advertisement and plug. But anyway, I was talking to him about it. I'm like, yeah, it's going to be Israel and Palestine. He said, yeah, when I was there, you know, it's really hard because, you know, you see the Israelites and you hear their story and it's just so powerful. And yeah, the Palestinians are, you know, they're there too. Sorry. So yeah, he said, you know, it's hard, but it is Israel's land. You know, it's the Jews' land. So that's kind of how it is. And I think that just kind of was a example to me of how many people just assume and then the conversation ends. And it's really important for people, you know, in more of those backgrounds. And I'm sure many mainline Protestants have those assumptions as well, of course. And so it's just important to consider our own assumptions and the assumptions of those around us in conversations. It's been a huge journey for me in just the past few years being here in Seattle. And so it's just, you know, everyone has to start somewhere on that journey. And so it's just important to remember that. And we all just kind of shared our different pieces of our journey, and that's what we talked about. So
thank you so much for that. And just remember, every single conversation like that you have, you get better and better and better. And it all goes into your experience bank, and you will use it. That is actually a great segue to our next section, which is the groups where you will be able to choose an area of exploration, leading, we hope and pray, to action. I know you've already taken a look at the 8 groups that are being offered, and you have an idea in your mind about which one you would like to go to. Remember that the name of the Kairos USA booklet is Call to Action, and that is exactly what the focus is going to be now. You already are an activist by giving your day here today. And there will be a way in which what you have experienced here can be used for the good of this cause. And I am hoping and praying that in the small group you will now attend, you will find at least one of those ways and some like-minded souls that can inspire and help to guide you. So now I'm going to give this over to the hands of others who can announce how the groups are forming. Who can do that for me? Liz, Randy, please, come up, Randy.
Emma's comments were that the group was energetic. We didn't have enough time, really, after the necessary briefing for as much discussion as we would have liked, and she'd like everybody to take one of these cards.
Excellent.
I don't have one card for everybody, but see me over here at this table, and I'll give you some cards.
Thank you.
All the cards have to do with websites that have to do with boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Linda Maxson. I was the recorder for Educating Within the Congregation. The facilitators were Liz Larson, Ed Crouch, and Mary Newman. I'm going to start with the facilitator comments. It was a nice mix of denominations and ages in our group, and it's important to fit things into everyone's own individual context. The key points were that action can take many forms. You can sell olive oil to raise awareness as well as resources. You can support missionaries on the ground. You can set up companionship programs. You can instigate programs of study. You can invite speakers. Some of those speakers can be people from Palestine. Don't wait to do something that will make a difference. And don't forget that always you've got to walk with hope. Things about change, it actually happens. Think about the Berlin Wall, LGBT, etc. The second key point was one around leadership. It turns out that politics of or in the Episcopal Church can be a huge obstacle. However, it can also be a source of enormous institutional support. It appears there may be some difference between the church in Oregon and the church in Washington. The Bishops' Committee in Washington was cited repeatedly as a really great resource for Episcopal churches here in Washington and the Diocese of Olympia. And also related to that, there's a need for diverse models for action and leadership, and there's a real desire for some kind of clearinghouse of information and resources, and there's a possible model for a clearinghouse from Oregon, Americans United for Palestinian Human Rights.
Thank you. Please.
Our group was talking about navigating concerns of your congregation. We had a small but very lively group, good discussion. Not all Episcopalians, which I thought was great. And I think that what we distilled out of pretty extensive discussion were the following. We talked a lot about encouraging pilgrimage within parishes, including youth. And the fruits of pilgrimage are the stories. I mean, there may be many other fruits, but the specific fruit for a congregation is probably the stories that emerge and can be shared. And some people will be more politically moved than others, but Deutsch, for instance, mentioned that he expects his congregants to make trips to the Holy Land and fosters that in the congregation as sort of a baseline. A second thing is creating opportunities for people to learn. There's a lot of prejudice and ignorance and avoidance, and creating non-threatening ways. Okay, can you hear me better now? Okay. Creating non-threatening ways to learn. Book groups, that was one suggestion. Speakers, films, all of those things that can be non-threatening. You could, lay out the buffet and people will eat or not eat, but at least that's all there. Not forgetting the importance of intentional prayer and preaching. And I think we talked a bit about the reticence to preach head-on about the Israel-Palestine conflict. And one of the things that seems to be important is to build up the support within the parish to help the clergy to become more confident that they can talk about these issues and not be rejected as being too partisan in one way or another, and focusing it all on the power of love and building up common ground. If we keep getting back to the essential mission of our lives as Christians, it's to bring love into the world and nurture it. And I think that's enough.
Thank you. Next group.
I'm Randy Ermston. I was a recorder for Group 6 on tools for discussing justice issues. And we had, the facilitators were Ed Mast and Linda Bevis. And the thrust was how to have a conversation on Israel-Palestine. And we practiced going around the room. Some of the questions were, why Palestinians don't want peace? What we call, and we'd take turns answering that and try to make an elevator speech. Another one was, why hasn't Palestine agreed to any proposal? Another was Israel's complaint that they have no partner for peace. We practiced addressing these as concisely as we could, so when we engage friends, we'd have some practice and pointers. And Ed and Linda were great in giving us tips on how to do that. Another question we were asked or addressed was, if Israel puts down arms, there won't be peace. That's what Israel said, of course. And then the other is a counter: if Palestinians put arms down, there would be no war. Right? I got that? Anyway, so some of the. Right, right. Okay. So, Ed pointed out both the importance of listening, and I thought of, like, I don't know if you've been involved in a fair fight, where you, the other party says what they're thinking, and then you repeat that to make sure you understand it, and it makes you forces to listen, and then equating with the elevator speech. Came through in our discussions, justice before peace, that's so crucial, and came out that there's no one answer for each question. Our facilitators, Ed, said it boils down to, he sees not so much a religious issue, but it really boils down to one group having power over another. And he also said it's important for all of us to talk one-on-one, and we've heard this before. I've heard at our table, someone just casually, a Jewish friend just mentioned it, and it turned out her friend said, I am just so embarrassed about that and ashamed about it. So you never know what will happen. And for me, it was very interesting. Again, Ed made the parallels to South Africa and the way the British treat the Afrikaners, just the way the Europeans treated the Jews, and the parallels there I'd never really fully appreciated. And so it was a very lively session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Richard Gilbert, and I'm reporting for Group 7, which was about the Kairos message. I'm not sure, want to discuss and have questions and concerns. And really, it became a discussion about the issue in general, what's happening, who's to blame, and stuff like that. And Liz took copious notes and wrote a succinct summary, so I'm going to kind of read it. Our group discussed questions which mainly dealt with America's involvement, for example, how to deal with Christian Zionism, AIPAC, and its 100% unconditional support of the Israeli government. Whether there's hope in America, especially given the media bias, and are younger people the key to change, which I think Group 2 is a good pointer in that direction. And also the Muslim involvement. Why don't Arab countries pressure the US, and why aren't Muslims around the world more vocal? And so we discussed that. And our facilitator, Lloyd, his comments are summed up as America's involvement is perpetuating the problem, which was a major topic of discussion. There's lots of big questions in this issue, which we're all in agreement on, and our group was very fortunate to have an Arab perspective being voiced. A gentleman from who's around here from Egypt, who's kept us on our toes. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Before I turn it over to the final group, I just want to share an announcement. I'm asking the group recorders or scribes to turn in your papers to Marla before you go home this afternoon. So now I turn to the final group 8 to make your presentation.
This is a joint report from Group 8. We were concerned with the future of a Kairos, or the possibility of a Kairos group here in Seattle. And the group decided to initiate the formation of a Kairos group using, in the beginning, the group that organized and formed this workshop that we're at today. The focus of this group will be study of the Kairos document, fostering it not only among ourselves, but among the congregations in our Christian community, outreach to congregations within the Seattle's Christian community, and coordination of existing pro-Palestinian groups so that more of us are aware of what's happening where, and allows people to become, that are interested to become involved in other efforts besides what we ourselves are doing.
I had the privilege of facilitating Group 8, and may I ask how many people are here attending a Palestinian justice event for the first time in their lives? Okay. Good. Well, once you become committed on this subject, of course, you have to do some work afterwards. And I'd like to share with you a moment. Some of you may have seen an article in the Seattle Times yesterday, about Professor Domke's group that's traveling in the South. He has several groups going, and they visit all the cities and places of very momentous events in the civil rights movement. And that article had a quote from a physician from Swedish Hospital who was going to be going on the next pilgrimage to the South. And here's what he said: in order to get social change, you have to change the community, not just yourself. So we've got work to do. Thank you.
I thank very much all of you for being here today, and the group leaders for the wonderful work you have put into those groups. And we do hope that they have been able to focus folks toward action. There are just 2 things left for us to do. One is that in your folders there are 2 pieces of paper. One is an opportunity for you to tell the planning committee the parts of this day that were most helpful, least helpful, and ideas you have for the future. Anything good that could come out of this gathering together, please write it down on this paper that you have in your folder, and that is going to be something we ask you to leave before you depart. Secondly, for our closing ritual, we're going to ask that we stand and get in a circle all the way around the room, and you are going to be served a cup of coffee, and we ask you to take it and hold it and to bring with you the liturgy, which is called bitter coffee and sweet tea. So I invite you to stand now and get into that circle and be served the coffee that is coming to you at this point. We have been shown great hospitality today. When we arrived, there were treats and coffee and water and tea through the day. There has been great hospitality even unto this point in time. Another part of the hospitality we've been shown has been all those weekly meetings, all those hours of work, all of the thought and prayer and connections which have been invested in this day. And so on behalf of all of us, I thank each and every one who was part of planning this event and all of you who have given this day to be here. In Palestine, when someone dies, family members grieve for 3 days, opening their homes to family, friends, and neighbors to pay their respects. Sitting in a circle, visitors are served small cups of unsweetened coffee. When the visitor drinks the coffee, they say, "May God have mercy on his or her soul," while remembering the deceased. During the summer of 2014, as Israel bombed schools, hospitals, and residential neighborhoods, more than 2,000 were killed, including whole families. How could they grieve? Who was left to remember? Many had no homes remaining in which to gather. Sometimes there were no neighbors left to invite. The killing and grieving predated the summer of 2014 and are still ongoing throughout Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel. Today we affirm the hospitality we have received. We join in the mourning which still takes place. We invest ourselves in the work of justice and peace. We honor the moral authority of those who suffer and yet still persevere. Has there ever been a visit within a Palestinian home which lacked the generous display of hospitality and diverse faces of wholehearted welcome? We are humbled and considered by the welcomes we have received. Where have children ever been freer to share a generous smile or to pass around a tray of snacks to strangers than those who have greeted us in Palestinian homes? Yet how can sweet hospitality carry the burden of deep and unrelenting grief? How can we share the cup of comfort when war and occupation destroy safety, home, and access to the tea of friendship? Instead of sweet tea, we share bitter coffee. The cup of comfort becomes a swallow to share our comfort. Does God answer the prayer of our friends? Let the bitter cup of occupation, incarceration, apartheid, and war pass me by. God calls us to swallow grief for those who lose lives, husbands, children, parents, neighbors, siblings, pastors, imams, community leaders, homes, churches, and mosques. Will God give us words to say which connect us in times of agony? Can you share the bitter taste of grief? Yes, we can. Will you listen for the authoritative witness of Palestine, speaking truth to power, offering creative resistance in the face of evil, and earning moral authority through suffering and faith? Yes, we will. Together. May God bless and strengthen our ministries and our works of justice and peace. May God protect and heal the land, the people, the churches, and the mosques of Palestine. May God forgive us for our times of complicity and complacency. May milk and honey once again sweeten a land too long turned sour through walls, checkpoints, prisons, and heartbreak. May the Spirit of Jesus Christ anchor our hearts, minds, and souls, gathering strength for the work to which we are called. In your mercy, O God. Amen.
Thanks be to God.